So let me just share the screen. I mean slide. So in this particular demo, we are going to talk about Cisco Firepower firewall. We'll discuss that what was the problem on the old firewall and why they introduces this new firewall, right? So let's go further. So here we are going to discuss about Cisco Firepower Threat Defense Firewall, FTD. So this firewall is a next generation firewall. This FTD is a next generation firewall, I can say. And if we compare, so FTD is going to provide same feature as it is provided by Checkpoint, Palo Alto, so similar feature is going to provided by this Cisco Firepower Threat Defense, which is known as a FTD. Okay. Okay, I would talk about other firewall of the Cisco. Cisco has earlier Pix firewall. Okay, this was initial firewall of the Cisco. Then they came with ESA, and now they are using Firepower. Okay, so ASA and Pix was very famous product from Cisco, which was earlier used, and in some organization you would still see that they are using Cisco ASA. Okay, these are the firewall which is from Cisco. But nowadays customer is upgrading their ASA firewall with Firepower. If they have the ASA firewall, so now they are upgrading into the Firepower. Okay, and this Firepower is a next generation firewall. This is next generation firewall. Okay, if I talk about next generation firewall, so next generation firewall is providing layer 7 functionality. You can you can inspect the packet up to layer 7. So from layer 2 to layer 7, all the inspection can be done with the next generation firewall. Okay, so let's discuss about this. Let me just go further. Here, if I talk of Cisco Firepower, so Cisco Firepower or FTD, this is unified software solution for ASA and Firepower. That means, Cisco ASA, earlier Cisco ASA was used. So on ASA, what you can do, on ASA, you can install the Firepower. So if you have this series of appliances of ASA, 5500 series of appliances with X model. Okay, so if you have 5500 series of appliances with X model, on these appliances, you can install this Firepower software. Okay, Firepower operating system. But check this Cisco came with the one solution that you don't need to deploy hardware or operating system separately. You can do with one device itself. So with the combination of both, they release FTD, which is Cisco Firepower Threat Defense Firewall. This Threat Defense Firewall is what? This is a dedicated appliance. Okay, that means these appliances are dedicated. You can purchase them. So let's say you have 21 series of 2100 series of the Firepower device. You have 41 series of the Firepower devices. These are the model number of dedicated devices. And this is a next generation firewall. So next generation firewall, as I mentioned, that next generation firewall is providing multiple feature. What all the feature can next generation firewall provide? Simply, next generation firewall is providing URL filtering. So if you want to do, you can do URL filtering with the next generation firewall. What else you can do? It is providing IPS feature. It is providing user authentication feature. Okay, it is providing, layer 7 inspection feature. So layer 7 comes under this. This is application inspection. So application inspection can be done by the next generation firewall. Okay. Also traditional feature it is supporting, like a firewall filtering. We can also say this is a packet filtering. So it is also supporting packet filtering. This feature it is supporting. That's what feature FTD supports. FTD can be managed centrally. Okay. So it can be managed from the central location. So let's say you have multiple firewall, multiple FTD devices, which are in different locations. So let's say one firewall in the US, other firewall is in India, and other firewall in, let's say, in UK. You have three location or three data center. So if you want to protect your US data center, which is behind this US firewall, so yes, you can do the protection, right? Protection can be done. How it is doing the protection? I mean, any infrastructure, you can put the firewall in the front of a particular data center. So let's say you have data center resources, which is behind this, so that you can protect it. But to manage all these firewall, okay, which is in different data center, you can manage from the central location, and central location is known as a FMC, Firepower Management Console. So you can manage all these firewall from the central location using FMC. This is Firepower Management Console. So you can manage all these devices from the central location, like you do on Checkpoint, you do on Palo Alto, same way you can do. And you can manage all these firewall from the central location using FMC. So what all the things you can manage using central location? You can manage policy, you can manage logs. Okay. So all the policy, if you require to see push any policy means rules, any kind of rule, whether that related to net or whether that related to firewall filtering or whether that related to IPS, any kind of rule you want to push, you can push through FMC. First of all, you have to integrate your gateway, or we can say FTD, into the FMC. So first of all, you need to integrate them. And after integrating, you can push the policy. Okay. You can view the policy. You can modify the policy. All those things you can do from the FMC itself. You don't need to log in on individual firewall. You can do it from central location. Also, these firewall would be able to send their logs. For example, whatever the traffic is passing through, if you are tracking all the traffic, okay, which is passing through the firewall, those traffic logs can be sent to the FMC. And this is going to provide, broader level logs. Okay. Not only it is providing the logs, but also providing the suggestion that this is the problem. If you implement this, so this problem can be solved. So also it is providing the suggestion. So this is interlocation FMC, using which you can manage policy and you can manage the logs. And logs would you would see in a very interactive way. Right? Any question? All right, let me clear this. Are you aware about this feature of the firewall, which is URL filtering IPS? Any one of you, if you have already worked on firewall, any earlier firewall? Okay, if not, let me just talk about all these features. So URL filtering, basically by the name, it's doing the it is allowing or disallowing the URL. So if we talk about next generation firewall, they are providing the support of URL filtering, and also older firewall is also providing, but not in that way. In URL filtering now you can do multiple inspection, or you can take the different action as well. For example, if you just want to have read only URL access, you can do read only URL access, or if you want to do the posting on the particular URL, that you can do. So it's kind of proxy work that your firewall can do. Okay, so let's see, this is my FTD. This is my FTD, and what I just want to do some filtering of URL. For example, we have a user which is connected to FTD, different set of user we have, maybe server as well. We have users, maybe we have server, and for that we just want to control the internet traffic. That means what they can access on the internet and what they cannot access, that what I just want to control. So on firewall we have to install licenses for the URL filtering. Okay, on FTD itself we need to enable licenses for the URL filtering. As soon as we enable the licenses for the URL filtering, we can decide that which category should be allowed and which category should not be allowed, right? So we can decide over here that whether, let's say there is a financial category, any website, financial website, any professional website, any professional URL, or any, let's say, banking kind of website, those websites should be allowed, or search engine. So those website can be allowed. We can decide that those website can be allowed, and whatever the website which we want to block, we can block. So this we can put on the whitelist. This category we can put on the whitelist, and on the blacklist, whatever the organization policy says, accordingly we can create the blacklist and we can block it. So that's the URL feature. So for example, I just want to block any hacking website, any peer-to-peer website like torrent, etc. We just want to block any, any kind of social networking. This website, if I want this category, we can do that. So how we will achieve this? We will achieve using the URL filtering feature. Apart from that, this FTD also supporting IPS. So IPS stands for Intrusion Prevention System. Like if someone is trying to do attack on our network, okay, so IPS, if the IPS signature are updated, so our network would be protected. So it is protecting against any kind of client vulnerability, or we have server vulnerability, server side vulnerability. It is protecting against both client and server side vulnerability, both kind of thing. So vulnerability means weakness. Sometimes we have some weakness in operating system. For example, let's say this server is running on a 2008 Windows 2008 version, and this is our compulsion that we have to run this, because the application which is installed on this server, that is only compatible with 2008. It's not compatible with any other server operating system. So 2008 is a vulnerable a lot, right? And this is end of the life as well. So that means if this server is vulnerable and we are running the application on the vulnerable server, definitely attacker can do attacks from here. Let's say this is attacker, and if this server we have exposed for the outside access, so they would do the attack to our server, and they would try to exploit the vulnerability which is existing on this server. So maybe you might heard about this vulnerability recently, log4j. Let's say there is any application is running on this web server which is vulnerable for log4j. Any Java application is running which is vulnerable for log4j vulnerability. Okay, So if we have IPS, it can be protected. Okay, if we have IPS and if it is upgraded, so it can be protected. Okay, it doesn't matter whether our server is vulnerable or not, but it's still my firewall is going to provide the protection against these kind of vulnerabilities. Okay, so that's the task of the IPS. IPS work based on the signature and the behavior. Okay, so by default, in by default, any vendor would be releasing the signature against the known vulnerability. Okay, so if there is log4j vulnerability or WannaCry vulnerability or any kind of other vulnerability, okay, SSL bleed vulnerability, any kind of vulnerability which is known vulnerability. So against those known vulnerability, they releases the signature. So what happens if the attacker is trying to attack or exploit these kind of vulnerability? So signature is going to match over here, and after the matching the signature, whatever the action is decided on the firewall is going to take the action. So if you have defined that any critical vulnerabilities, if any critical vulnerability attack is there, so it should be blocked. So if attacker is doing a exploit of any critical vulnerability, log4j is very critical, its rating is 10.0. So if any critical vulnerability is there, your firewall is going to block it. So that's what the use of the IPS. We have user authentication feature. In user authentication feature, basically, before sending the packet, before allowing to the user, firewall is going to ask him, him or her authenticity. Okay. After proving his identity, firewall is going to allow him to access over the internet. For example, let's say you are working in any organization, and before accessing any website, if your organization is asking you to put username and password, that's what the user authentication. Okay, so Firepower does support the user authentication. Before accessing anything through the firewall, if you enforce the user authentication, user has to provide its identity. That means username and password that user has to provide. Okay, so that's the user authentication. Then we have layer 7 inspection feature, which is application inspection. So this firewall can do the application inspection. So if you are allowing any particular application, instead of relying on the port, it is authenticating the application. So let's say you are the user and try to send traffic over internet, and here you have FTD, right? FTD, and you are trying to send traffic over the internet. Maybe you are doing any browsing, web browsing. Okay, so if you are doing any web browsing, so definitely your firewall would not rely on the port number 80 or 443. It would dig further information that you are generating the traffic to the internet by which particular application. So let's say you are generating the traffic using Zoom application. So firewall would be identify if you have allowed Zoom for this particular user. So Fire would be able to identify that traffic is from the Zoom application or it's a different application. So if traffic is generated from Zoom application, then this would be allowed. But if there is any other application that would be generating the traffic, that may be dropped. So we can provide granular control, right, using the application. Maybe for Zoom, we just allow the video and voice calling, and maybe we are video and voice we are allowing, but maybe using Zoom we can do a lot of collaboration work. So other work, for example file sharing, we just want to block. So we can also do using this application control. So it is able to do the application inspection, and in the application inspection we can put granular control. And also firewall filtering, that means this firewall can still support traditional firewall which is working on port number. So it still can filter the traffic for the particular port. So if you don't have application and you just want to allow or deny the traffic based on the port number, that's what you can do using the firewall filtering policy. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, I would consider as a no. Let me clean this. So once again, I'm just going to repeat that your FTD firewall is a combination of ASA and firepower. Both of feature would be on FTD firewall, and it is providing dedicated appliance as per your use. You can purchase different capacity appliances. It's the next generation firewall, and we discuss what the next generation firewall support. Okay, and it can centrally manage through FMC, and it is included improved IPS, which is known as a SNOT. SNOT is a open open source IPS. So your firewall, this next generation firewall, is going to use this SNOT IPS, which is open source, and this IPS is going to provide all the functionality which you would see in the checkpoint or in other IPS as well. Let me move next. If I talk about course content, so these are the major topics that we are going to cover over here. We will talk about introduction. We will talk about the deployment. We will talk about how the packet and policy is processed. We will talk about how you can create the object netting rule. Okay. Then we will talk about how you can implement those NAT into the firepower. Then we talk about pre-filter policy. What are the pre-filter policy? How you can use it. After that, we will discuss about access control policy. We will talk about security intelligence. We will talk about next generation access control policy. And then finally, we'll talk about IPS. Apart from that, I would also be discussing about VPN, HA, troubleshooting. All these part also I'm going to discuss. So this is the course content. If you have any question, please ask regarding the course content. Okay, no, let's move next. Okay, this is the physical appliance, and this is Cisco Firepower 2100 series of appliance. Let's see what you see in the physical appliance of FTD. This is FTD series, and this is a physical appliance. On physical appliance, that the purpose to build hardware for the Cisco next generation firewall. That's the use of main purpose of for FTD physical appliance. On physical appliance, you would see that there are fixed configuration. That means you cannot remove these module or not. You cannot add any additional module over here. This is fixed configuration. This firewall support dual power supply. Okay, there would be two power supply. If one power supply gets failed, no problem. Other power supply would provide the power, and this is hot swappable. That means if the firewall is on, you can still replace the power supply. You don't need to turn off, or there would be no effect while you are replacing the power supply. For onboard connectivity, that means if you want to connect to management or if you want to connect to the console, you have the management and console port. So there is a console port through which you can access the console, and there is a management port, MGMT port, through which you can access the firewall. So either you can access, if you want to access GUI, so you can access through management port, and if you want to access CLI, you can access via this console port. Right? These are the ports. So these are the firewall ports. These are the firewall port through which some of the firewall port you might be configuring internal, external, like this you are configuring, or maybe DMG, maybe VPN. So these are the firewall port. So one port, if traffic moving between one port to another port, there would be firewall OS, FTD OS in between. That means if the any traffic is received on this port and want to go here on the next port, so it is going to evaluate the firewall policy. It would go via FTD. Or we can say this is a firewall code as well. Firewall code. So there would be firewall code. Through the firewall code, the traffic would move. So whatever the settings you have done or policy you have applied on the firewall code, through that policy, this is going through. Okay. Now there are other port as well. You can see here. I mean other component as well. So here you can see solid state drive, because on this firewall SSD is used. So it has a dual SSD. Dual SSD means two SSD drive. One is storing the operating system. Okay, that's the default of storage. Here you would have OS, and other is for AMP. So AMP is another feature of the next generation firewall. This is another feature of the next generation firewall. What is stand for AMP? This is stand for advanced malware protection. Okay, so using the AMP feature, this is kind of sandboxing, right? For example, if you have any particular file for which, let's say, there is no signature present, but that file is malicious, so that would manage by this advanced malware protection feature. So to manage the advanced malware protection feature, you have the storage, and that is a dedicated storage. For that there is a separate SSD device. Apart from that, you have SFP module. Okay, and fail to wire option for future is this is available. So these are the advanced these are the additional feature it has. So if you want to decrease the capacity of your interface, that you can manage through SFP. Okay. Now let's talk about demo. So let me just try to access the lab. So if you want to access our lab, you can access through labs.netminion.net. Okay, let me just log out and try to log in again. Here you need to provide username and password, whatever the username password is assigned to you. You may provide username password and then you click on login. As soon as you click on login, here you can see the all topology and different rates as well. However, this I think your lab is included in this particular course, FTD course. So you can click on access your lab, and you have a different lab assigned. Maybe if you pursuing different courses, then you have different lab assigned. Okay, and then you can access a particular lab. So for example, if I just want to access, sorry, I am not able to see the Firepower lab over here, but let me show you that how your lab would looks like. I'm just opening anyone. Let's try to open this. Okay, so here you can see this is your lab. Okay, you can access it, this lab, any devices. If you want to access, you can just access it by clicking on it. So as soon as you click on it, this is going to open over here, and you can perform all the tasks regarding the configuration. Simply you can, similarly, if you have a Firepower lab assigned, so you can access that as well. Okay, this lab is accessible 24/7. You can access at any time. Okay, and you do for doing any kind of practical, you don't need to install any software or any hardware at your home. You can just use our lab and you would be able to perform those. Okay, if at a time multiple lab is assigned to you, you can close one lab and then you can open other lab as well. For example, I'm just opening this lab, Palo Alto. I can open it, I can click here. As soon as I would click here, I can see the console. Similarly, if you have Power lab is assigned, you can access that as well. Okay, any questions so far? No? Dennis, Jitendra, Kevalya, Manish, or Shahid. If you have any question, you can ask me. Okay, if no questions, so I would like to wrap up the session over here. Okay, and if you want to join, you can join the course for Firepower. We have already running one of the running courses going on. Okay, and by tomorrow or day after tomorrow, we are going to start, Firepower on that.